really interesting story. We touched on it some time ago, but I think given that what's going to happen tomorrow, we should revisit it. This is a new centre. The first legal drug consumption room opens tomorrow in Scotland. This is where the clients will come in and they will inject illegally bought heroin or cocaine under medical supervision. This is called the Thistle. It's based in Glasgow's East End. There is a high population of users who take drugs in public. It's been funded by the Scottish Government, and its aim is to reduce overdoses and drug-related harm, as well as making drug use less visible to the community. Now, the changes, they've been trying to do this for a very long time. The drug laws are set in Westminster. They're enforced by the Scottish courts. But the reason it's changed is Scotland's senior prosecutor, the Lord Advocate, has said that users would not be prosecuted for possessing illegal drugs. So the Scottish Government is saying that this is a good initiative, it's a great initiative, it gets drugs off the streets, paraphernalia off the streets, and I suppose in some ways gets those users into an arena where they can access care and trying to get them off the drugs. Well, joining me now is Annemarie Ward, CEO of Faces and Voices of Recovery UK, based in Glasgow. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, David. Thank you very much for having me on this morning.
No, absolute pleasure. Now, I think we last spoke in September of last year about drugs generally. Your thoughts on the first legal drug consumption room? I know there's a major problem in Glasgow. The levels of drug misuse or abuse have skyrocketed.
That's right, David. And, you know, you said there that this will be a place where people come to inject drugs that they've brought in, but the heroin-assisted treatment programme, which is a free heroin programme, is also in the same building. And you also mentioned that, you know, people will have access to other types of care. And just to make it perfectly clear, that is not true. In Glasgow, we only have 23 rehab beds, so the argument that this service can be a gateway or a doorway into services that can actually help people is it's not true.
OK, and what about the other argument where they say we'd much rather people injected these illegal drugs in a place where we can monitor them, watch them. If they do go into a coma, we can care for them. Crucially, it takes the drugs, the paraphernalia, the needles, which you can see openly in streets in Glasgow. They say it will take this off the streets.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it will. You know, we're talking about 2.3 million to have to tidy up the drug paraphernalia litter. I mean, bear with me here. Just think about it in terms of, imagine a city that's got a £50 million treatment budget to fix its roads. They spend 8.3 million putting up warning signs around the potholes. That's the heroin-assisted treatment programme and the drug consumption room. They spend 40 million patching them up temporarily so that cars can drive over them. That's the rest of the methadone maintenance services. But only £1 million actually gets help repairing the roads to make them smooth and safe again. That's what's happening in Glasgow. We've only got £1 million going into actual rehabilitation out of that £50 million treatment budget. So most of the money is being spent in this delusional attempt to manage the problem, not in actually fixing it. And actually a tiny fraction is going to help people recover and rebuild their lives. And just spoke earlier about the nurses who are, you know, being recruited to work in the corridors, you know. And here we are rolling out the red carpet for people to come in and have a so-called safe place to take really, really damaging drugs. And it's been portrayed as compassionate and kind. I don't think there's anything compassionate and kind about a system that does not offer people actual help to get off drugs and spends, you know, many, many times more money on facilitating drug use rather than helping people get clean and sober.
I mean, you're right, it costs an absolute fortune, £7 million over 5 years. They have no idea how many people will use the facility. It's thought about 500 people use intravenous drugs daily in Scotland. What is if this isn't the answer, and I'm not sure it is the answer, but they've modelled it on other countries, something like 100 other countries do have drug consumption rooms. If this isn't the answer, what is the answer?
Well, this is it as well. They're modelling it in other countries where the drug use and the drug deaths are in a very different pattern to the drug deaths. Most people who die in Scotland use alone and they die in their own home. That's why the naloxone programme was also a bit of a publicity stunt for the Scottish government. I think the solution is to offer people genuine compassion and genuine care and rehabilitation. We know in Scotland there are only less than 140 rehab beds for the whole of Scotland that are accessible to people who aren't wealthy. There are a lot of other rehab beds obviously in the private market that people can access if they can pay, really quite extortionate amounts of money, but it's quite simply a case of the rich get rehab and the poor get methadone. And I can assure you, the litmus test for this is if any of these doctors or people in charge of these decisions about where this money's being spent were being asked where their child should go or their loved one should go for treatment, they would not be sending them to the drug consumption room or the methadone programme. They would be sending, the people in decision-making positions here would be sending their loved ones to rehab. And actually, my final point, if you will, is just that, when a doctors get sick, where do they send each other? Do they send each other to drug consumption rooms? Do they send each other to the methadone programme? No, of course they don't. They send each other to rehab, So I would just like to see the same type of care available to, ordinary people.
So in many ways what you're saying is this is the government's attempt to get it off the streets, to get it out of people's vision, rather than solving the problem.
Well, yeah, there's that, and there's also an attempt by the Scottish Government here to look as if they're doing something, and they're spinning it as if it's progressive and innovative, and they're also telling the people who live in the area, who will of course be badly affected by the inevitable crime rates that happen when these rooms open, that they are being not compassionate towards the drug users.
Can I just pick you up on that? Why do you think the crime rates will spiral when the drug consumption rooms open? Aren't the crime rates already high because people are using on the street and they're stealing to fund their habit?
Well, they are already high, you're right, but they become magnets for more crime, particularly violent crime, prostitution, theft. Businesses in the area suffer. There's, in all the drug consumption rooms that have been opened across the world, that is a very real thing that happens. It's just a fact that happens. So unfortunately, what I think the Scottish Government are doing here is, buying into headlines so as it looks as if they're doing something. And, you mentioned that the Lord Advocate made the decision to open these rooms, and for over a decade, the Scottish Government played political football with this issue, blaming Westminster. And actually what they could, the Lord Advocate could have made this decision 10 years ago. So, there's been a terrible game of political football here, and headline grabbing, blame game politics, if you ask me. And I think that's been incredibly detrimental to the people who are suffering and the people who can't access help.
Is there a worry here, by opening a drug consumption room, that you're almost legitimising the use of intravenous drugs, illegal intravenous drugs? Because the idea here is you bring in your own drugs, you inject them under medical supervision, but essentially you're destigmatising the whole process.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it does legitimise, really dangerous drug use. It also normalises it in the community, and more importantly, it removes, the stigma is there for a reason. Shame is a very common emotion that human beings, feel to prevent themselves from acting it in certain ways. And if we remove that stigma and that shame around drug use, what we're saying is that, at the expense of being non-judgmental, our people are really suffering, and communities are suffering, and families are suffering, just so as we can say that we're being virtuous and non-judgmental. I think it's okay to judge people who are addicted. I was addicted myself many years ago, and I think there was, I broke my own moral code during that time, because that's what addiction does. It takes us to places that, you know, that drives us into places where we do act immorally. And I think that's a conversation that, you know, the good people who think that they're doing the right thing here, that they don't want to recognise that addiction corrupts us of all morality in many cases. So I think there is a bigger discussion to be had here about, you know, trying to save people from, you know, from harmful behaviours and co-signing harmful behaviours, when actually, you know, what people need is access to get back on their feet and to get freedom from dependency. You know, just to stand by idly and watch someone take drugs isn't virtuous, it's not compassionate, it's not kind. And this is how it's been spun to the people in the local area. They're being made to feel guilty that they're somehow being, you know, stigmatising or prejudiced towards drug users. And, you know, the drug users that will use this facility will often have grown up in that area, so they'll be well known to the community. And the community just wants to see these people get well. They're not stigmatising them, you know, they're not being judgmental. They just genuinely want services that can help people recover rather than co-sign and enable their use.
Just moving on a slight tangent, we have a huge problem with drugs in this country, in Scotland, also in England and in Wales and in Northern Ireland. One of the drugs that seems to have reached a new zenith is ketamine. This is a very cheap drug. It is being used by young people. It's a party drug. The number of adults in England and Wales using the Class B, it's currently Class B, it's trebled in a decade from 117,000 to 299,000. I believe the figure to be far higher than that. And as we know, it's one of the ingredients that was in the cocktail of drugs that Liam Payne took. They are suggesting that actually a review needs to happen so that essentially ketamine, which started as a horse tranquilizer, but it obviously is being used in a party setting, is then recategorised from B to A. I'm not sure that makes any difference at all, because I'm not sure young people look at the classification of drugs and thinks, oh, it's Class A, I won't bother to take it because at the moment I take it as B. It doesn't work like that.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, the ketamine is damaging people far quicker than heroin ever did. You know, the drug, when I was growing up, that most people had access to who were seeking drugs was heroin. But this particular ketamine is so damaging. You know, people are becoming so sick. They're, you know, irreversible damage to their bladders, and you'll know better than me the effects that it has on the body. And again, it's so accessible. And because we've removed the stigma and we've normalised drug use, I think young people, and also we don't have any prevention programmes in our schools, they don't understand the real dangers of taking drugs, you know, because we've normalised it to the point where we're co-signing it and enabling it, and we've just become resigned to this fact that, you know, everybody uses drugs and we're all just going to use drugs every way, so we might as well just use them safely. I mean, to me, that is a piece of very good social engineering that's been done over the last 20 years, but there's still time to change it. We can get prevention programmes back into our schools. We can socially engineer this to make using drugs shameful again. You know, we did it with seatbelts. We did it with smoking cigarettes. There are ways to tackle this if the political will is there.
Annemarie, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. That's Annemarie Ward there, CEO, Faces and Voices of Recovery UK.